Hello and welcome to the Petersfield Bookshop Recommends. This is our series of short videos in which we take a look at a particular genre or type of writing, or perhaps a subject or even a single author, and provide some recommendations. We think you are all pretty smart cookies out there and able to find the big names and the bestsellers for yourselves, and so we will try and send you down some less well-trodden byways in the company of writers not so well known. This video is about books on World War I, and obviously that's a huge field. You'll find a selection here which touch on a number of different aspects of the subject, but these are just pointers. As with all our recommends videos, we are not claiming these are the best, we are recommending them as worthwhile and useful reads. Our first choice is Tommy, written by the late great Richard Holmes. A bit of a monster at over 600 pages, it nevertheless covers every aspect you could imagine of life in the British Army on the Western Front. I turned to this book to find out more about the experiences of men like my great-uncles, who left behind little of how they lived and died, and found answers to many questions. Holmes divides a huge subject into 6 accessible chunks which can be read as written or dipped into depending on your area of interest. Together they enable the reader to grasp the reality of what happened in France and Flanders 100 years ago. It's hard to convey how wide-ranging this book is, but Holmes incorporates veteran interviews to paint a vivid picture of those 4+ years. Starting with an overview of the situation on the Western Front, the geography and a general timeline provide context. He then considers the men who served, the old and new armies, recruitment, regimental and regional loyalties, and the wide range of roles for the ordinary rank and file. This is followed by an examination of the organisation of the British Army from top to bottom. Following this are sections dealing with life in the trenches. What was the reality of living in a dugout when most activity occurred at night, alternating with time behind the lines? He describes experiences which range from the sublime to the ridiculous, and talks about recreation, diet, weather, how trenches were constructed, and so much more. In the next section he deals with armaments and the realities of battle, the weapons in use, the advent of tanks, the development of aerial warfare, but also what it was like to be in a battle, whether going over the top, in close-range fighting, or under enemy bombardment. The final part of the book deals with the emotional and spiritual side of war, how soldiers dealt with trauma through comradeship, the support of the chaplains at the front, and how other ranks viewed the enemy, issues of discipline, punishment, and so on. The next book is one I only read recently, but which has added so much to my understanding of the war in the Middle East. The Fall of the Ottomans is written by Eugene Rogan, director of the Middle East Centre in Oxford. It's easy to view World War I from a purely Western perspective, but after Turkey's entry into hostilities in support of Germany in 1914, everything changed. Most people know of Gallipoli, but the campaigns in Palestine, Sinai and Mesopotamia have been almost forgotten in the past as mere sideshows. Yet hundreds of thousands of Allied troops fought and a huge number died in the Middle East. If you've ever wondered why they were there, then this is the book that will explain it all. Rogan uses recently available Turkish and Arabic sources, ranging from the papers of high government officials to foot soldiers and private individuals, and as a result gains a fresh perspective seeing the Great War from the point of view of the Ottomans and the Arabs. The Great War saw the end of the Ottoman Empire as they attempted to fight on several fronts simultaneously. The result was the dismemberment of the empire and ultimately the birth of modern Turkey. Rogan is the kind of expert who manages to explain a complex subject via an engaging narrative that keeps the reader's interest. The descriptions of battles and subtleties of politics are generally easy to follow. So if you want to understand more about this aspect of the Great War, then you can't do better than to start here. Our third book is a less well-known one by another highly regarded Great War researcher. Lynn MacDonald wrote a number of books covering the war years, and like Richard Holmes, she interviewed hundreds of people in the process. The Roses of No Man's Land is the first of her books which I read and deals with the experiences of many women who served as nurses, both at home and behind the front lines. To quote the author, on the face of it, no one could have been less equipped for the job than these gently nurtured girls who walked straight out of Edwardian drawing rooms into the manifest horrors of the First World War. This account, told through interviews, letters and diaries, of how they rose to the challenge with endurance and courage, is inspiring and humbling. As well as describing the setup of base hospitals, casualty clearing stations and medical care back in Britain, we learn about their often appalling living conditions and the trauma of working and sleeping under enemy attacks while treating those who had sustained horrific injuries. It was a period when new medical techniques were being forged out of necessity, including psychiatry, plastic surgery, x-rays and anaesthetics, and the nurses were learning at a frantic rate. There are the stories of some of those who were killed by enemy action or succumbed to sickness while on service. Although this book was somewhat unusual when first published in 1980, in that it deals mainly with women during the Great War, it also tells of the doctors and orderlies, as well as the fighting men who were on the receiving end of the heroic efforts of those women. While it makes for difficult reading at times, this is a beautiful tribute to the nurses who served. Our next book is The Beauty and the Sorrow by Peter England. Moving away from a British perspective, but again drawing on letters and diaries, England has brought together the stories of 20 unknown individuals from around the world, from both sides of the conflict. The result is an epic overview of World War I as experienced by these 20, whether on active service, as volunteers, or those simply trying to survive. Proceeding chronologically, we are introduced initially to the American wife of a Polish count living in Warsaw, followed by a 12-year-old German schoolgirl, as through their eyes we hear the news of the outbreak of war. What follows is a remarkable story which unravels through a widely varied cast of real-life characters. There are Anzacs, medics, soldiers, sailors and airmen, citizens of Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Austro-Hungary, Denmark, Russia, Belgium, and even a Venezuelan soldier of fortune who fought for the Turkish army. All the theatres of war are covered, including the often forgotten West Africa and Mesopotamia, plus other events such as the Armenian genocide and the Zeppelin bombing raids over England. As an added bonus, England managed to track down photographs of all 20 protagonists, which really helps the reader to connect with them, plus other fascinating photographs from the times and places mentioned. We can recommend this book to anyone who is interested in learning more about the war as experienced by ordinary people of all ages, class or nationality. It's an absorbing read, and you may be surprised how much you can pick up about the war in general via these personal stories. Our final recommendation is Diary of an Old Contemptible, From Mons to Baghdad, 1914 to 1919, the diary of Private Edward Rowe, which is edited and annotated by Peter Downham. It stands out for two main reasons. Firstly, it's the diary of a private soldier who had received a very basic education in his native Ireland, but had a wonderful talent for descriptive writing with a gentle humour. Secondly, it's the remarkable account of a soldier who saw active service over 5 years in 3 theatres of war, was severely wounded twice and yet lived to tell the tale. Rowe's military career began in 1905 when he accidentally joined the East Lancashire Regiment in the belief that he was joining the cavalry, thanks to a mischievous recruiting sergeant. In August 1914 he went to France with the British Expeditionary Force, arriving just in time to avoid the battles at Mons and Le Cateau, but joining what became known as the Great Retreat. Subsequently sent north to the Ypres salient, he was involved in the first and second battles of Ypres, before being wounded and sent back to England to recover. Late in 1915 he was sent to Gallipoli, where he describes the harrowing experience of being chosen for a firing squad for the execution of a 19-year-old deserter, although he questions how anyone could be called a deserter when there was no way off the peninsula unless you were wounded. After the evacuation of the forces from Gallipoli, Rowe was sent to the Persian Gulf, where he took part in the battles along the Tigris to take Baghdad from the Turks. During this period he gives a vivid impression of life in Mesopotamia. The numerous futile battles before a final success, the extremes of weather they had to contend with, and the flies. Full of detail, we are able to get right inside his head to understand how Rowe viewed the war as it unfolded, and gain an appreciation of his feelings towards the men he fought alongside. The extensive historical notes are invaluable for filling out the details and occasionally correcting dates. Rowe was demobbed in April 1919 and died in 1952, aged 66. That's the end of this video. If you have been inspired to get hold of one of these, we have made them into a list on our bookshop.org page where you can buy new copies from us. Otherwise, please do check out our website at www.petersfieldbookshop.com and also the other videos in our Petersfield Bookshop Recommend series here on YouTube. Many thanks. See you soon.